Record. Okay, there we go. We're recording. So those of you who are unable to make it or on spring break or doing something fun, good for you. Let's jump in here, do the screen share. Tonight's going to be a little bit different, and I'm excited for that. I think this is going to be a cool one. My name is Tanner Withers. I am the host and founder of All Ability Planning. And the reason that I do these workshops, the reason that I do the work professionally as a special needs planner is because of this cute little girl. I've got two of them at home, but this one is our daughter whom we adopted from Colombia. She has a rare disease called Cornelia de Long syndrome. And so she's my connection personally to the special needs community. I like to do these workshops every Tuesday night, and specifically, I like to talk about financial benefits, estate organization, and family support strategies. There's not there's not a roadmap for parents of kids with special needs. They don't tell you how to do this once you find out that you have a child with special needs, and so that's why I want to do this. I want to make it really easy for us to navigate how to do all of our planning that we need to do. The purpose of this workshop every night, or excuse me, every Tuesday night, is to empower families of all abilities to live their life's potential. Uh, there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's a lot of people that do different types of things that allow this. Here's the short of it. As parents or as kids of those with special needs, all we are told is what we can't do, right? When we have a disability or a child with a disability, they're told all the time what they can't do. And so instead of focusing on that, we want to focus on what we can do, which is planning and controlling that. The goal of this workshop is to give you all the information you need to confidently take the next step in your planning. I want you to take action. I want you to learn something from this and do something to better your life situation. The format, if this is your first time, every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, quick and bite-sized, 15 to 20 minutes worth of content, and then we open it up for Q&A. It's also recorded, so if you're not able to stay the whole time, or if you didn't join us live, that's okay. We'll always have a recording. This is the important disclosure as always. This is just for educational purposes only. This is not considered advice. Yes, I give advice for a living, but this is not that. Tonight, this is just education. If you have specific questions and you do need advice, please reach out to a professional. Okay, so here's what we're talking about tonight. Here's the topic. This is going to be broken up into two parts. Tonight is Investing 101, special needs style. Next week, we are going to talk about the only three things, in my opinion, that we can actually control when it comes to investing. And I think this is especially important because it is an election year, which means the markets tend to do some crazy things. And even if the markets don't do crazy things, I can promise you that the media is going to scream and yell from their high towers about all of the crazy things that are going to happen in the markets. Okay. So I really wanted to break this down. I know that this is a little bit different than maybe some of the things that we talk about tonight, but we're going to talk about why this is so important. So I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I normally do. Typically, I go through slides. Tonight, I am actually going to go to the drawing board here. So hang with me. I am going to move my camera in such a way that allows me to show. We're going to unshare. And hopefully this will go in such a way that allows you to see. Come on now. All right. I think that's the one. I think that's what we're looking for. Okay. All right. So this is going to be, we're going to go interactive mode. We're going to go to the screen and we're going to focus on some options here as far as how to talk about the Investing 101 here. Okay. Let's make sure it's working. It looks like it's working all right. So the first question that I want to address is why invest? Why not just save our way? So obviously the first key of investing is we've got to make sure that we can get money into the investments to eventually save for ourselves and for our kids with special needs. But the key here is why not just save it? Why not just put it in a savings account? Well, the first part of this is going to be what all of us are experiencing right now, which has become very real as of late, and that's inflation. Okay. Because of inflation, every single year, the dollars that we have, hang on, I gotta let some people into the meeting here. Hang on here. Okay, all right. Every single year, because of inflation, right, our money becomes less and less valuable. We can buy fewer and fewer things, and it's never been more real than it is as of the last year, as of recently, where things are just becoming exponentially more expensive. And so again, overall, we cannot simply save our way to a successful future. We have two retirements, and I've shared this before. We have our own retirement as mom and dad or caregiver, whichever role we feel. But the second role is, or excuse me, the second retirement that we have is the retirement for our kiddos, our loved ones with special needs, which is their lifetime after we are no longer their primary caretaker. Okay. So that's the first piece here is we have to invest. We cannot simply save enough money. It will never, ever work. The second part that I want to outline here is what I like to call the rule of 72. Okay. Some of you, and I know that's not coming through super clear. I got the screen in front of me, but the rule of 72, what is the rule of 72? This is really important when it comes to investing. With the rule of 72, you simply take 72 divided by the interest rate, and that's how long it's going to take for your money to double. Why is this important? Well, we just talked about inflation. Right now, inflation is crazy high, and economists will argue all day long about what that number actually is. Historically, on average, inflation does about 3% per year. So if you take 72 and you divide that by 3%, okay, that's going to give you 24. What that means is that every 24 years, things are going to become twice as expensive as they were beforehand. So think about a typical life. Let's say that you've got 4 24-year periods in your life. That means that in the course of a lifetime, things are going to double 4 times, become really, what is that? Multiple times more expensive over the period of your life. That's insane. But we can do the exact same thing when it comes to investing, and that's what I want to show you today. So as you'll see here, I've got a little bit of a graph, and I want to break down how this works. I'm going to give all of the kudos to my mentor, Kurt Peterson, who showed me this. I studied finance, guys. None of this ever made sense to me until I learned it this way, okay? And I'm hoping that that's what I can break down for all of you to hopefully make this make more sense. So the first category here on this side of the quadrant is what I am going to call fixed income. Okay. The first area of fixed income that we have is going to be cash. Now, I don't think this warrants a whole lot of conversation. I think we all know what cash is. When I say cash, I'm also talking about checking accounts or actual dollar bills that we have in our pocket. Okay. With cash, we are really not earning pretty much anything. The value of the dollar stays the same. We're not earning anything like that. Yes, inflation is baked into it, but we're essentially going to say that the value of cash has zero interest rate, okay? Meaning that it is never, ever, ever going to grow. And that's why we cannot exponentially save our way to a successful retirement and for our own kids and for their needs. The second part of this is going to be what I call money markets, high yield savings, and CDs, okay? So what are these? This is a little bit of how the banking system works. This is why the bank wants your money so darn bad. You'll see promos all the time of, hey, if you deposit a certain amount of money in here, we'll give you extra money. Here's why. In case you didn't know, the bank takes your money and they immediately turn it over to another bank at a higher interest rate, or they invested in something that earns them a higher interest rate. So in the case of this scenario, in our second quadrant here, money markets, which are very popular right now, money markets are paying like 5%. If you're not getting 5%, please make sure that you find one. You can reach out to me and I'd be happy to recommend a money market account that pays something like 4%. But money markets are going to be our next quadrant. We also have high yield savings accounts, same thing, and CDs. Here's how this differs from cash. Well, instead of leaving it in its cash form, what we're doing is we're actually giving it to the bank and we're saying, hey, bank, take my money, invest it into something else, and give me a higher rate of return. We're not necessarily taking on more risk. We're just changing our access to the money. A perfect example of that is going to be a CD. With a CD, which stands for Certificate of Deposit, what we're doing is we're saying, bank, take my money and lock it up for 3, 6, 12 months. Those are typically the regular time periods of a CD. And in return, the bank says, okay, you cannot access that money for the period of time in which it's locked up, But at the end of that period, we will give you your money back and we will give you interest on top of that. Okay. So that's the first part about how this is going to work. Again, we're basically saying, hey, I want a higher rate of return, but that also means that I'm not going to be able to have readily access to my money as much as I would like. The next column here that we're going to talk about is bonds. Okay. There are two different kinds of bonds for simplicity purposes. The first kind of bond is going to be what's called a municipal bond. Municipal is going to be government, local, things like that. The second type of bond for today's conversation purposes is going to be a corporate bond. Okay, so let me give you an example. For a municipal bond, let's say that our district decides they need to build a new school. That costs a lot of money. So what the district could do is they could go out and say, hey, we are issuing a bond where we are requesting money in order to build this project. We're going to keep your money. This bond is going to last for 10 years. And for that money, we are going to pay you 4% per year. Okay. So they're going to say, we're going to pay you 4% every single year while we hang on to your money here so that we can build our school. What's nice about that is we have a guaranteed rate that we know for sure we are going to make on that money. Now, our actual investment that we give to them, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, whatever it is, that's not going to change. But the rate of return that we get, the 4% on top of that, that is what we earn. Same thing with a corporate bond, very similar. One of the key things though with a municipal bond is usually they're state or local tax free. So that's kind of a nice feature there. With a corporate bond, these are simply just companies. So let's think about it in terms of Tesla. Let's say that we have Tesla and they're saying, hey, we need to build a new factory to pump out more vehicles. We need to raise money. So they say we are issuing a bond and we're going to pay 4% for that bond. You give us your money, we're going to hang on to it for 30 years. In 30 years, you'll get your money back. But every single year, we're going to pay 4% of that 30-year period. Okay. Why would someone want a bond? Well, there's two reasons that someone might want a bond. Number one, it is predictable cash flow. So if you're getting a bond and you say, hey, I just want a predictable amount of money that I'm going to get every single year, this is it, because you know that you're going to get 4%. Now, the only way you would never get 4% is if the company or the government ran out of money or they went under and they could no longer pay you. Is that possible? Sure. Not super likely, but it is possible. The second reason, though, that someone may consider a bond in their portfolio is because typically, not always, but typically, bonds will do the opposite of what stocks do. We're going to talk about stocks here in just a minute. But think about it this way. If the stock market starts to tank, people tend to take their money from the stock and run to something like a bond because a bond is typically more predictable, as we just talked about. And so what does that do? That makes the value of a bond go up in value because now everybody's running towards the bond and saying that's where I want to be. The opposite is also true. If the stock market is going up, people might look at that and say, well, why am I sitting over here at a 4% bond when I could be in the stock market earning a heck of a lot more? So now bonds become less valuable. So the way that I like to use a bond in a portfolio in a lot of situations is to say, it's just going to act as a hedge. It is going to do the opposite of whatever the stock market does. So it's a little bit of some downside protection. Okay. I'm going to put a pause on this. This is much less exciting. I think where it gets more exciting and more confusing is over here on the stock side. Okay. Now, another thing that I do want to point out let me add the rest of the people in here. I think we had a couple people waiting. Sorry, let me make sure they're in. Okay. All right. On the bond side, important to point out here, with bonds, you don't own any part of the company, right? You're simply giving them your money and they're saying in return, we're going to give you a fixed interest rate. When we move over to the stock side, this is where we actually start owning a piece of the company. And this is why you will sometimes hear stocks referred to as equities. Think of it as equity in your home. If you have equity in your home, that is the amount of money of your home that you actually own after any loans or mortgages or anything like that. So same thing applies with companies with stocks. We actually have equity in those companies, hence why they're called equities. Okay. So there's three different kinds of stocks. And the way that I like to think about it is comparing it to real estate. For whatever reason, I think we understand real estate a little bit more than we do the stock market. Probably because we've watched all of the shows on HGTV, right? So let's talk about the first area of stocks. And I'm going to call these stocks growth and income. Okay, and I'm going to give you an example of what this actually is. In order to understand what a growth and income stock is, let me compare it to a rental property. Okay. Think about it. With a rental property, there are two ways that we can make money. The first way is the underlying property, right? So the underlying property value can usually will go up over time. Okay. We buy a property for $100,000. We hang on to it for 10 years. 10 years later, that property is probably going to be worth more than $100,000. That's the first way that we make money. The second way we make money with a rental property is we have a renter in that property that pays us money to live there. And hopefully, ideally, if it's a good property, that rent payment pays more than our mortgage. So the excess is the portion of money that we are making. The same thing applies in the stock market. We have stocks in the stock market that are what's called a dividend paying stock. I'm going to throw out an example here. Okay, I was going to ask for a recommendation from all of you that are joining, but to make it a little bit easier, let me just throw out a recommendation here. And to do that, I'm going to reshare my screen again. And I want to show you how this actually works. Okay, I am looking at Yahoo Finance. Any of you can go to Yahoo Finance. This is a tool available to anybody and everybody. Dividend paying stocks are usually going to be household name companies that have been around for a very, very, very long time. So think about any household company, any household name that you can think of. I'm going to throw out one that's popular as of late. It may be a tad controversial. I am not getting political here whatsoever, but it's just been in the news a lot lately. And so I'm going to throw this one out. Pfizer. Okay. A lot of us are hearing about Pfizer since the pandemic. This is a perfect example of a dividend stock, or in other words, this growth in income, this rental property. Here's what we're looking at here. If you go to Yahoo Finance and you type in Pfizer, you're going to notice, and I'm going to bump this up, make it really easy to see here. You are going to notice this dividend right here. And you're going to notice next to it, it has a dollar amount, $1.68. And in parentheses, it has a percentage. Here's what this means. For every one share, for every one stock of Pfizer that you own, which is currently $27.59, for every one share you own, Pfizer is going to pay you $1.68, which in percentage terms is 6.1%. Let me back out and let's talk about what that actually means and why that matters. That's $1.68, or that's 6.12%. That is your rent. That is your rent check. Here's why I love it. Two ways that you make money by investing in a stock like a dividend or growth and income stock. Number one, the stock that you own can and hopefully will go up in value over time, just as the property value would. Number two is the dividend. What is a dividend? A dividend is simply excess earnings that a company has, and instead of turning around and reinvesting it into the company, they give it to us as investors. And this is sort of a thank you or an incentive to continue investing our money with them. So that $1.68 that we get per share, and if we own lots of shares, then obviously that adds up really quickly. That is money that we are making regardless of whether the stock market goes up or down. And here's why I love that. You can look at the stock market at any given day, and it's going to be crazy. It's going to be up, it's going to be down. People are going to be screaming about it. Why doesn't that exist in the real estate market? Well, with real estate, we don't have a market where you can simply go and look at the appraisal of any given house at any given time. And if we did, I guarantee the housing market would look the exact same as the stock market if we were looking at it every second of every single day. But again, if we have periods in which the stock market is going down, these dividend stocks are still paying us money. So we are making money whether the stock goes up or down, but obviously over the long term, it's typically going up. So we're making money two different ways, just like a rental property. The second one that I want to focus on here is what I'm going to call growth, G for growth. Another example of this is going to be like a flip with real estate. So think back to HGTV. We had all of those shows, Fix It or Flip It, whatever they're called, right? Essentially what's happening is the investor is coming in, they're buying a house, the ugliest house on the street, they're putting in some new carpet, new paint, and then they turn around and they sell that property for more money than they bought it. That's how they make money. There's no renter, there's no nothing. They're just buying low, selling high. The exact same thing exists in the stock market. These are going to be companies that are growing very, very, very rapidly. But instead of taking any profits that they have and giving it back to us in the form of dividends, they're saying, hey, we're just going to reinvest it and keep growing. So a good example of this would be like an Amazon or a Tesla. Tesla is a really good example. Tesla pays no dividend. So we are buying Tesla because we think, you know what, I think this stock is going to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. We are flipping the stock just like we would flipping a property, okay? The last example here in the stock market area is going to be aggressive, A for aggressive. Here's the real estate example. This is like buying land in the middle of nowhere. The land is worth nothing because nobody lives there. There's nothing around. But maybe one day that land is going to be worth something. Maybe we have urban sprawl. Maybe they start developing out there. Who knows? And we got in early. And so we bought this land for super, 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 super cheap. Well, the same thing exists in the stock market. These are buying companies that you probably have never heard of before. Okay. These are companies that they're probably not even profitable. They're very small. They're growing as fast as they possibly can. But if we invest in them, we put a little bit of some money into that, that could turn into an Apple or an Amazon or a Pfizer or a Johnson & Johnson or any of these massive companies that have been around for a really long time. We're betting on the fact that, hey, they're going to be worth something at some point in the future. That's the same idea as buying land in the middle of nowhere. These are our three options when it comes to investing. Now, as you can see here, we also have this risk metric. And what the risk metric does is it tells us, okay, in a rental property, how risky is that relative to flipping a property, relative to buying land in the middle of nowhere? Well, if I had to do a chart, right, it's a little bit of some risky, but once we start buying these companies that are smaller and smaller and smaller, the risk goes way higher and way lower, meaning it's much, much choppier the more money that we get in here. Now I've drawn a chart on here very intentionally. These bar charts are very intentional as far as how I've drawn them. Here's why. This is what I see most investors do, and this is not the way that it should be done. In other words, what I see a lot of investors do is they say, I'm going to go buy that small company that only I have ever heard of because I've researched it, and I think it's going to turn into something really, really big in the future. So I'm going to put a good chunk of money in there. But in case it doesn't, I'm going to have a lot of money in cash. Okay. And so we have these two extremes where we have this tiny investment that maybe doesn't have a really good shot of actually making us any money, but we also have a lot in cash just to be sure. This is not a good recipe for success. This is a U shape, okay? I hate the letter U. I'm a BYU fan. I hate the letter U. The U stands for the University of Utah. We don't stand for that shape here. Here's the way I like to do it. I want to cut this down. And I want to say, we want to have some cash, but not a ton because cash earns us nothing. We also want to have a little bit of some money markets and some high yield, so I'm okay with that. I would like to see though a few more bonds here, right? Some of those bonds are going to give us that stability. I don't really care if it makes me any money, but sure, I would like to have some more bonds in there for some stability. I also want to own a ton of rental properties. These rental properties make me money whether the stock goes up or down, right? They're paying me dividends, so I'm making money while I'm sleeping. That's the dream. So I want a lot of, in fact, maybe the majority of my money in these rental properties. Conversely, these are also the companies that have been around the longest. Think of Johnson and Johnson. They pay a very consistent dividend, and they've been around for over 100 years. That's a company I feel confident investing in. They've been through COVID, they've been through the crash of 08, they've been through 9/11, they've been through the 80s where interest rates were insane. That's the kind of company that I want to have in my portfolio, and a lot of it. I'm also then okay to say, hey, let's have a good amount of these flips, a good amounts of these Teslas, a good amounts of these, small, maybe smaller size companies, but they have a good trajectory of growth. But I in no way, shape, or form want to put a ton of money into this land in the middle of nowhere. I do want to have some. Okay. So I'm not getting rid of it, but I do want to have some, not too much. Now look at the shape of our portfolio. It resembles a pyramid. No, I'm just kidding. We're not talking about pyramid schemes or anything like that. Okay. What we're talking about is having a well-balanced portfolio that hedges against potential risks, but also gives us the maximum potential to grow. In other words, those investment in those rental properties. Okay. And the last thing here is this does not apply to everybody. Depending on your stage of life, depending on your risk tolerance, how much you have in each category could and should vary. But this is just an illustration of how we want to see our money. So the next question is, okay, if I'm all in bonds, right? If I'm all in bonds here and I don't have any sort of stocks, I could expect to earn maybe between 3 and 5% per year because that's what interest rates are doing right now. Well, let's take 72, divide it by 3 or 5, and how long is it going to take for my money to double? Compare that to the stock market. What does the stock market do on average? We're going to say 8 to 12% on average. That's a range over the long term. Now, last year, for any of you who followed what the stock market did, it returned about 26%, which is insane. And that is certainly not the normal. So please don't feel like that's going to happen every year. But that's a really good example of one of those huge, huge, huge years where just a couple of years ago we had a negative year because of COVID. So same thing applies if we take 8 to 12%, and let's just take an average here. So if we go in the middle and we say 10, if you average 10% on your investments, divide that by 72, that means every 7.2 years, the amount of money you have is going to double. That's huge because we have 2 retirements to save for. We have our own retirement and we have a second retirement, which is the life of our loved one after we've passed on. I'm going to come away from the board here. Okay. Let me put this back up and I want to share my screen again to talk through one last thing here. This is all great, but how do we make sure that this actually becomes exciting? You can do a very simple exercise where you Google a future value calculator, okay? Go to Google, type this in. This will help you understand how much money you could potentially have by investing. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to put this back up here so I can see you guys a little bit better. Okay, here's how this is going to work. A Roth IRA is a very common investment a very common investment account. Roth IRAs this year have a limit of $7,000 per person per year. If you're 50 or older, you get $8,000 per person per year. Let's just say it's $7,000 a year. We are going to assume that over the next 20 years, right? You can pick any number here, but in the number of periods, we're going to say 20 years. We're going to start with nothing. We're going to assume a 10% interest rate, which may be a little bit of aggressive, but let's, we can change this as much as we want. And then every single year, every period, we're going to add $7,000 into this account here. And we hit calculate. If you invested $7,000 every single year for the next 20 years, you would have $400,000. Now, what's awesome is of that $400,000, only $140,000 of it is money that you put in. The rest is growth. Okay. Now, what if we bump this out and we say 30 years, right? 30 years, you may say that's a really long time. That's a 30-year life. That's retirement, right? That's a retirement year that you would potentially have. If you invested, if we go just from 20, man, this is crazy. If we go just from 20 years where you had $400,000 and we say we're going to invest for another decade up to 30 years, that's $1.15 million of money that you would potentially have invested. Again, same thing. If you, of that 1.15, 210,000 of that is money that you put in. This is why you cannot save your way to a successful future. Because if you only save 210, you're only going to have 210. But you put this money into an investment, just like we talked about here over on the whiteboard, and we diversify it in such a way that allows us to earn a consistent rate of return over time, which is never guaranteed. Our potential is $1.1 million or beyond, depending on the rates of return. I hope this is valuable to you. I hope that this, number one, makes the stock market seem a little bit less scary than it can otherwise be. And I also hope that this encourages you to say, you know what, I can invest. I can put a little bit of money away and it's going to make a difference. Here's the challenge, and I'm going to end on this. Take action. Download a statement from all of your investment accounts, 401ks, IRAs, brokerage accounts, and I want you to go through every single investment. If you don't know what it is, you can go to Yahoo Finance and type it in, and it'll tell you exactly what the investment does. Here's the bonus. If you don't understand your investment breakdown, send the statement to me, and I will give you a free analysis of exactly what you own. No strings attached, no nothing, just here's what it is, here's what you own. We have to understand what we have already if we want to change and make the habits that we need to make in order to get us to the success. This is something I'm willing to do for anybody at any time. I've got some really cool tools that can make this happen. I will happily send over a report to you that says, here's exactly how it works. And the key is I'll send it to you in plain English, right? So I won't send you this crazy mumbo jumbo that can oftentimes be hard to understand. That's my commitment to all of you guys. And that's the challenge as we end here tonight. Next week, now that we have an understanding of what how investing works, maybe hopefully a little bit better, next week I want to talk about what are the only 3 things that we can actually control when it comes to investing. Okay. I'm going to end here. Here's my contact information. If any of you have questions or if you want to take me up on that bonus challenge there, this is my email. I would also actually say, if you do want to send me a copy of your statement to have you or to give you that free analysis, don't actually send the statement for security purposes. Send me an email though and say, hey, I'd like you to look at this. And then I'll give you instructions on how to securely upload that so we can protect all of the information and privacy. But if you just have any other questions outside of investing, anything to do with special needs, you're always welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to meet with anybody. I don't charge to, answer any questions or anything like that. So I'll leave that there. I'll jump into some Q&A here. I think majority of people are joining us on the live. And to be totally honest, I do not know how to see all of the questions on live. So let me come off here. I'll stop share. Let me see if I can pull up my screen. Because I don't know exactly how to do questions on the live. But if you have questions, you can try and drop it in the chat. Or you can reach out to me directly, and I'd happily answer those questions for you. But I'm going to hang out here for a couple more minutes, see if we get any questions come through in the chat. Otherwise, have a good night. We'll see you next week. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to stop our recording.